62 days. That was the precise countdown displayed on the little wooden calendar I kept next to my desk, a gift from a particularly sentimental student 2 decades ago. 62 days until the final bell rang on my 30-year tenure at Northwood High. 62 days until the sacred silence of retirement descended upon my perfectly ordered life. I was Eleanor Vance, 52 years old, and my world was constructed of predictable symmetry. Lesson plans filed by historical era, spice racks organized alphabetically, and evenings dedicated to grading papers, tending my meticulously planned English cottage garden, and perhaps a quiet glass of Cabernet. I was an expert in the past, and I was planning a future defined entirely by peace. That Tuesday afternoon was supposed to be dedicated to the French Revolution, specifically a stack of essays analyzing the Reign of Terror. Instead, it became the day my carefully constructed reality went up in smoke, quite literally. The smell started, subtly, not the familiar scent of burnt toast, but something acrid, chemical, and deeply wrong. I traced it to the kitchen. I had been attempting to clean the oven using a powerful new self-cleaning cycle, a task I had put off for months. When I opened the oven door to check, a small, aggressive plume of fire erupted from the heating element, catching the residual grease in the vent above. It wasn't an inferno, but it was sudden, violent, and utterly terrifying. My first instinct, honed by decades of emergency drills, was to reach for the small fire extinguisher under the sink. My second instinct was the one that betrayed me. Panic. I fumbled the heavy cylinder, and as I bent to retrieve it, my left ankle, already weak from an old skiing injury, twisted sharply. A white-hot bolt of pain shot up my leg, and I collapsed against the counter, gasping. The flames were licking the cabinets now, small but growing quickly, fed by years of accumulated dust and dry wood. The smoke was thicker, stinging my eyes, clogging my lungs. I was trapped between the crippling pain in my ankle and the rapidly expanding threat. I scrambled back, dragging myself across the tile floor, clutching my phone. My voice, usually steady enough to command a classroom of 30 teenagers, came out as a pathetic, wheezing croak when the 911 operator answered. My kitchen. I managed, coughing uncontrollably. Fire. I can't move. My ankle. The next few minutes were a blur of terror and disorientation. The smoke alarm shrieked, a high, piercing sound that felt designed to peel the paint off the walls. I could hear the distant, growing wail of sirens, but they sounded impossibly far away, like background noise in a bad movie. I closed my eyes, pressing my face into the relatively clean area near the floor, focusing on the pain in my leg just to distract myself from the heat. This was it, I thought numbly. My perfect quiet life, ending here because of a misplaced bottle of oven cleaner. Then the world exploded with sound. The front door, locked, secured, and always double-bolted, gave way with a resounding crash. Heavy boots pounded on the hardwood floor. A figure materialized through the haze. He was enormous, clad in thick, almost alien-looking protective gear, a helmet obscuring his face, save for the dark visor. He carried an axe, and for a split second, I thought he was a terrifying apparition. "Fire department!" A deep, gravelly voice cut through the noise. It wasn't shouting, but it held an undeniable authority that instantly calmed the frantic beating of my heart. "Ma'am, where are you?" "Here," I wheezed, weakly lifting an arm. He moved with the efficiency of a predator, covering the distance between us in 2 powerful strides. He dropped to one knee beside me, the sheer bulk of his gear radiating competence. "I'm Tom Riley, Engine 4. We're getting you out now." He didn't wait for confirmation. He assessed the fire behind him. It was still localized, but sending thick, black smoke everywhere, and then focused on me. He didn't touch my leg, but gently slid one massive gloved hand under my shoulders and the other under my knees. I felt myself lifted effortlessly, like a child. The movement jarred my ankle, and a small, involuntary cry escaped my lips. I know, he murmured, his voice muffled by the mask, but surprisingly kind. "Just hold on." He carried me out of the kitchen, past the entryway where another firefighter was already deploying the hose, and out the front door, stepping over the splintered remains of my perfect white door frame. The cold, crisp autumn air hit me with brutal force. I gasped, sucking in huge drafts of clean oxygen. Tom didn't put me down immediately. He carried me across the lawn, away from the immediate chaos of flashing red lights and shouting voices, setting me down gently on the hood of my neighbor's parked SUV. It was only then, as he knelt before me to check my breathing, that he finally lifted his helmet, pushing it back off his head. And that was when Eleanor Vance, the meticulous historian who specialized in predictable patterns, met the man who would irrevocably rewrite her future, Thomas Riley. He wasn't a young man, certainly not the strapping 20-something calendar model I sometimes saw on recruiting posters. He was closer to my own age, perhaps 50, maybe 51. His hair was thick and dark, streaked with silver at the temples, damp with sweat and plastered to his forehead. His face was lined, not harshly, but etched with experience, fatigue, and a deep, inherent seriousness. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were the color of warm whiskey, intense and focused, framed by dark lashes that seemed absurdly long for a man whose job involved wielding axes and fighting death. They were currently fixed entirely on me, assessing my health, my fear, my shock. "You're safe now, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice clearer now without the helmet. It was just as deep as before, but smoother, resonating with a weariness that spoke of long shifts and too little sleep. "Eleanor," I corrected automatically, feeling a ridiculous surge of embarrassment over the state of my hair and the tears streaking my face. "Thank you. I'm so sorry about my door." He offered a small, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "Don't worry about the door. It's better than the roof. We can replace wood, Eleanor. We can't replace you." The simplicity of that statement, the sheer weight of its truth, delivered by a man who saw tragedy every day, hit me harder than the smoke. I stared at him, suddenly hyper-aware of the heat emanating from his heavy, soot-stained coat, the way his chest rose and fell steadily beneath the protective layers. "Your ankle," he continued, professional again, running a quick, practiced eye over my swollen joint. "It looks like a sprain, possibly a break. We've called the EMTs. They'll be here in a minute." "It's just humiliating," I whispered, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. "I teach history. I organize things. I don't usually require rescuing from a faulty kitchen appliance." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made my chest feel strangely warm despite the cold night air. "Accidents don't check your resume, Eleanor. They just happen." He paused, his gaze softening again. "You did exactly the right thing calling us when you couldn't reach the extinguisher. You got yourself out of the direct line of fire." He spent the next few minutes ensuring I was warm and answering questions from a police officer who had arrived to secure the perimeter. I watched him interact, firm, direct, utterly in control. He spoke to his team in short, efficient bursts, then turned back to me with that same patient, steady focus. When the ambulance finally pulled up, flashing its own rhythmic red lights, Tom stood up, adjusting his heavy belt. "The EMTs will take care of the ankle. We'll finish ventilating the house and leave a report for you. Make sure the fire marshal checks the stove before you try to use it again." He was leaving. The realization felt like a sudden drop in temperature. He had been my anchor, my savior, and now he was returning to the chaos, leaving me to the mundane reality of paperwork and pain medication. "Wait," I said, reaching out instinctively, my fingers brushing the heavy fabric of his sleeve. He stopped, turning those remarkable whiskey eyes back to me. "Thank you, Thomas Riley," I said, meaning it with a depth of gratitude I hadn't known I possessed. "I owe you." He smiled again, that tired, genuine smile that made him look his 50 years, and yet utterly magnificent. "Just doing the job, Eleanor. Get that ankle looked after." He gave a slight nod, pulled his helmet back down, and strode back toward the house, disappearing into the orchestrated tumult of the fire scene. He was back in his element, a man defined by the urgent needs of the moment. The EMTs were kind and efficient, fitting me with a temporary brace and preparing me for transport to the hospital. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I looked past the flashing lights to the figure of Tom, standing near the still smoking entrance of my home, directing his team. He was a force of nature, a necessary chaos. And I, Eleanor Vance, lover of routine and quiet historical analysis, had just had my first terrifying taste of his world. In the ambulance, as the pain medication began to dull the throbbing in my ankle, a new feeling emerged, a warmth that had nothing to do with the residual heat of the fire, and everything to do with the steady presence of the man who had carried me to safety. I knew, with the certainty that only comes from deep, unexpected shock, that this encounter was not finished. He had saved my life, yes, but he had also injected an unbearable dose of adrenaline into the bloodstream of my quiet, predictable existence. How was I supposed to return to grading papers and planning my restful retirement when I knew that, somewhere out there, Thomas Riley was running toward the very danger I spent my life avoiding? The thought of him, encased in that heavy gear, risking everything, sent a shiver through me that was part fear and entirely part something else, something electric, terrifying, and profoundly hopeful. Narrator note to audience: if you're enjoying Eleanor's unexpected adventure, hit the like button. What do you think she should do next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The hospital was sterile and quiet, the exact opposite of the chaos Tom Riley represented. They confirmed a severe sprain and a hairline fracture, fitting me with a cumbersome walking boot and crutches. My orderly world now included a significant painful limitation. As the painkillers began to work their dull magic, my mind, usually a precise instrument focused on dates and treaties, kept circling back to him. Thomas. The way the firelight had caught the silver in his dark hair, the sheer, effortless strength when he lifted me, the profound sincerity in his whiskey-colored eyes. I was released late that night, driven home by my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet woman whose primary source of excitement was the weekly bridge club. She clucked sympathetically over the charred smell permeating the air and the sad, splintered remains of my front door. "Oh, Eleanor, thank goodness you're all right," she said, surveying the damage. "That fireman, Thomas, he was marvelous. He stayed until the ventilation team finished. Such a dedicated man." Dedicated. That was the word. Tom Riley wasn't defined by the past, like me, but by the relentless, demanding present. The next few days were a study in discomfort and disruption. My kitchen was sealed off, reeking of smoke and chemicals. I couldn't stand long enough to make proper tea, let alone grade papers. Retirement planning felt utterly irrelevant. All I could think about was the debt I owed, both tangible, the door, and intangible, my life. I had to see him again. It wasn't just gratitude, it was an urgent, magnetic pull I hadn't felt since I was 25 and foolishly in love with a graduate student who preferred medieval history to me. This was different. This was adult, weighted by experience, and fueled by a shock that had peeled back the layers of my carefully constructed composure. I called the station number listed on the incident report. Engine 4. The woman who answered, a dispatcher, judging by the clipped efficiency of her tone, sounded weary. "Engine 4, how can I help you?" "Yes, I'm Eleanor Vance. The fire on Elm Street earlier this week. I need to speak to Captain Riley, please." There was a noticeable pause. "Captain Riley is on shift. Is this regarding the incident report or property damage?" "Both, actually," I lied smoothly. "I need to discuss the replacement of my front door, and I also owe him a profound thank you." "One moment, I'll transfer you to the duty officer." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was ridiculous. I was a respected academic, organizing a call to a fire station like a nervous teenager asking for a dance. A deep, unfamiliar voice answered. I explained my situation again. The officer, a Lieutenant Miller, listened patiently. "Captain Riley is out on a call right now, Ms. Vance, but I can certainly pass along your..." "Thanks. As for the door, that's standard procedure. We'll cover the structural damage. If you just need to arrange delivery or a follow-up, I can give you his direct line. He handles all the civilian communication for major incidents. Direct line? It sounded like an official necessity, but to me, it felt like an invitation. I scribbled the number down on the back of a grocery receipt, my hands shaking slightly. I waited 2 hours before calling. I didn't want to seem desperate, but I couldn't wait until the next day. I needed to hear his voice, grounded and steady, outside the context of burning wood and sirens. He answered on the second ring. Riley? Tom? It's Eleanor Vance. A small, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his tone, a warmth that wasn't there when he first answered. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. How's the ankle? It's being properly dramatic. A lot of ice and crutches. But I'm fine, thanks to you. I cleared my throat, trying to regain my professional footing. I called the station about the door. Lieutenant Miller gave me your number. Thank you for handling the repair details. It's the least we can do after we broke the thing, he said, the sound of his low chuckle traveling clearly through the line. But honestly, Eleanor, I'm glad you called. I wanted to make sure you got home okay. I worried about you stuck in that boot. I'm managing. Listen, I know you're busy, but I want to thank you properly. I can't exactly cook right now, but I could buy the entire station lunch or perhaps a decent coffee machine. He paused and I could almost picture him, leaning against a fire truck perhaps, those striking eyes crinkling at the corners. That's generous, Eleanor, but unnecessary. We get enough donated pizza to sink a ship. He hesitated. How about this? I need to finalize the incident report and check the fire marshal's notes on your stove anyway. Could swing by tomorrow afternoon, off shift. Just for a few minutes. We can talk about the report and you can give me a cup of tea, if your kitchen is up to it. My heart gave a sharp, joyful thump against my ribs. The kettle survived. The tea set survived. The French Revolution essays survived. I think we can manage tea. Tomorrow afternoon would be wonderful, Tom. Great. Say, 3 o'clock? I'll text you if anything changes. 3 o'clock, I confirmed, feeling a silly grin stretch across my face. We hung up, and I sat there, staring at the scarred spot on my counter, realizing I had just secured a date with my rescuer under the guise of an incident report review. My neatly scheduled life had just been hijacked by a man in fire-resistant pants. The next day, I spent an absurd amount of time preparing, hobbling around on my crutches, trying to make the living room look less like a patient recovery area and more like a place where a distinguished, heroic man might want to sit and discuss historical parallels to modern disaster management. At 2:58 p.m., a sleek dark blue pickup truck, clean, surprisingly, pulled into my driveway. Tom Riley emerged. He was dressed in worn jeans, a grey thermal shirt that subtly outlined the impressive muscles under his arms, and a comfortable leather jacket. He looked rested, rugged, and completely magnificent. Without the heavy gear, he seemed approachable, even gentle. He held a paper bag in one hand. Eleanor, he greeted me, his smile wide and easy this time. You look much better than you did draped over Mrs. Henderson's SUV. And you look less like a medieval knight, I countered, leaning heavily on my crutches as I let him in. Come in. Please ignore the residual smell of panic and lighter fluid. He stepped over the threshold where the new, temporary door was already installed. It smells like a job well done to me. He held up the paper bag. I brought coffee, real coffee, from a specialty place near the station. I figured if the kettle survived, the historian deserved decent caffeine. Thomas Riley, you are a mind reader. Thank you. He settled onto my sofa, accepting the cheap porcelain mug I offered him. He didn't immediately launch into the report. He just looked around my living room, taking in the overflowing bookshelves, the antique globe, the framed historical maps. This is nice, Eleanor. Very grounded. Grounded is the goal. I spend all my time studying chaos, so I prefer order at home. He nodded, taking a slow sip of the coffee. I get that. We spend all our time running toward the chaos, so we crave the quiet when we're off shift. We talked for nearly an hour, and the conversation flowed effortlessly, leaping past the usual formalities. We discussed the strange rhythm of our professions. I explained the beauty of historical patterns. He talked about the brutal unpredictability of fire. I spend my life trying to understand why things happened, I mused, resting my injured foot on a cushion. You spend your life trying to stop things from happening. I just try to manage the inevitable, he corrected softly. Fire is inevitable. Accidents are inevitable. We just try to minimize the damage. He leaned forward, his whiskey eyes locking onto mine. And save the people. The moment was charged, intimate. He was acknowledging the magnitude of what he had done for me, not with bravado, but with simple, quiet fact. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to understand him more deeply. Why do you do it, Tom? You're 50. You could be on a golf course. Why run into burning buildings? He sighed, a deep, tired sound. It's hard to explain. When you walk into that smoke and you see the fear, it's pure. And when you pull someone out and you see the relief, the life coming back into their eyes. He shook his head. There's nothing else like it. It's purpose. It's what I'm good at. He shifted slightly, catching sight of my little wooden calendar on the adjacent desk. 61 days, he noted, reading the displayed number. Retirement countdown? 61 days until 30 years of service are complete, I confirmed, a sudden wave of uncertainty washing over me. Until 61 days ago, that number was sacred. Now, I'm not sure what I'm retiring to. Peace and quiet, I imagine. No more teenagers arguing about the French Revolution. Yes. But maybe I don't want quiet anymore. I met his gaze, letting the raw honesty hang in the air between us. Maybe, after meeting you, I realized I've been living in black and white and I just got a terrifying glimpse of color. Tom didn't laugh. He simply held my gaze, his expression serious, understanding. Color is messy, Eleanor, and it's loud. I'm starting to think messy and loud might be better than perfectly organized and lonely. Narrator note to audience. If you're finding Eleanor's shift in perspective as thrilling as I am, tell us in the comments. Where are you listening from today? And on a scale of 0 to 10, how much are you loving this unexpected romance so far? The incident report review was brief, almost an afterthought. The fire marshal confirmed the old stove was faulty, and the insurance would cover the rest. We filed the paperwork, but the document was just a pretext. We were talking about life, about fear, and about the surprising, terrifying risk of finding connection late in life. I've been divorced for 15 years, Tom confessed, stirring his cooling coffee. My kids are grown. They're both in college now. I've been dating my job, essentially. It's easy. It doesn't ask for commitment, only competence. I never married, I admitted. I dated the past. It's also easy. It never changes, never surprises you. Until it nearly burns your house down, he chuckled. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that feels intimate rather than awkward. I watched him, noticing the way his hand wrapped around the mug, the faint scar just above his left eyebrow. A souvenir, perhaps, from one of those inevitable accidents he managed. Tom, I started, my voice soft. I know this is fast, and perhaps it's the residual adrenaline, but I really enjoy talking to you. I enjoy talking to you too, Eleanor. He put the mug down. And I promise, the adrenaline is gone. This is just chemistry. He reached out, his big hand covering my smaller one, which was resting on the arm of the sofa. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was incredibly gentle. A current of warmth, far stronger than the residual heat of the fire, flowed between us. I'd like to take you out, he said simply. When you're off crutches, we can go somewhere quiet. Until then, maybe I can bring dinner here. I'm a surprisingly good cook for a man who usually eats truck stop chili. I smiled, my heart soaring. I'd like that very much, Tom. I'd like that more than I can say. He squeezed my hand. Good. Just as he started to say something else, his jacket draped over the back of the chair began to vibrate insistently. It was his phone. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and the easy warmth instantly evaporated, replaced by that focused intensity I had first seen in the smoke. "It's the station," he murmured, holding up a hand. He answered with a terse, "Riley, go ahead." I watched his face change as he listened. His jaw tightened and his eyes scanned the room. Though he wasn't seeing me anymore, he was already back in the world of immediate action. "Copy that, Lieutenant. Engine 4 is en route. We'll meet them at the staging area. I'm on my way." He ended the call, shoving the phone into his pocket. He stood up swiftly, the relaxed man in the leather jacket suddenly replaced by the captain. "I have to go, Eleanor. Structure fire, downtown." The abruptness was jarring. It was the first time I felt the sharp, cold reality of his profession intrude directly into our connection. "Of course," I managed, scrambling to get my crutches. He was already halfway to the door. He paused, turning back, his expression a mixture of urgency and regret. "I'm sorry. This is what it's like. I can't schedule the disasters." "No," I said, steadying myself. "I know. Go. Be safe, Tom." He covered the distance between us in 2 quick strides, leaning down. He didn't kiss me, not yet, but he placed a firm, quick kiss on my forehead, a gesture of profound affection and hurried reassurance. "I will," he promised, his voice rough. "I'll call you the second I'm back at the station." Then he was gone. The door closed, and I heard the quick crunch of gravel as his truck roared out of the driveway. I stood in the sudden silence, the warmth of his kiss still lingering on my skin. The coffee was cold. The incident report lay forgotten on the table. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was vast, empty, and terrifying. My heart didn't slow. It hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, echoing the imagined sirens and the pounding of heavy boots. Downtown. A structure fire. He was running toward the danger, leaving me behind in my quiet, organized living room, waiting. I had complained about the loneliness of my ordered life. Now, I was experiencing the terrifying, adrenaline-fueled loneliness of loving a man who might not answer the phone. The countdown to retirement felt meaningless. My new countdown had just begun, the wait for Tom Riley to return home safely. And I knew, with a certainty that eclipsed any historical fact, that this was just the beginning of my new, chaotic existence. Narrator note to audience: if you're gripping to the edge of your seat watching Eleanor navigate this dangerous love, hit the like button and subscribe. Do you think Tom will make it through the mill fire safely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The silence that followed was a vacuum, cold and absolute. I tried to follow his instructions, to trust the training, to trust him, but trust felt like an abstract concept when the local news alert flashed across my phone screen. Massive blaze at historic mill complex. Firefighters facing extreme conditions. I didn't turn on the television. I couldn't bear to see the live footage, the terrifying orange glow that would confirm his proximity to danger. Instead, I paced, a slow, painful hobble, favoring my recently healed ankle, tracing the same path across the Persian rug, my mind trapped in a loop of worst-case scenarios. This was the price. This paralyzing, stomach-dropping anxiety was the cost of trading my quiet, predictable life for Thomas Riley. I had spent 52 years cultivating peace, and now, in the span of 2 months, I had willingly embraced a life tethered to the edge of catastrophe. I looked at the small wooden calendar, 25 days until retirement. What was I retiring to? A life of waiting by the window, dreading the sound of the phone. At 1 a.m, the news updated. The fire was contained, but the search for the trapped civilian was ongoing. At 2:30 a.m, the next chilling headline: 2 firefighters treated for minor injuries. Minor. It was a word meant to reassure, but all it did was confirm that Tom was operating in an environment where injury was inevitable. Was he one of the two? Or worse, was he still inside? I grabbed his leather jacket from the back of the chair, pulling it around me. It was still warm, still carrying his scent. Smoke, sweat, and something uniquely Tom, like clean air after a storm. I buried my face in the collar and allowed myself a moment of pure, selfish terror. I didn't want to live Life defined by this constant low-grade fear. But the alternative, the quiet, Tomless existence I had meticulously planned, was now unthinkable. I would rather have the chaos, the fear, and the profound joy of his presence than the sterile safety of solitude. At 4:17 a.m., just as the grey light of dawn was beginning to seep through the curtains, I heard the sound of a heavy engine idling softly outside. It wasn't the roar of his pickup, but the more muffled, tired sound of a service vehicle. I scrambled to the door, fumbling with the lock. Tom stood on my porch. He was unrecognizable. His face was streaked with black soot. His helmet was missing, and his heavy turnout coat was scorched and torn at the shoulder. He looked utterly exhausted, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, his eyes red-rimmed and sunken. He looked old, worn down by the night, and impossibly beautiful. He didn't move immediately. He just stood there, leaning slightly against the doorframe, confirming his safety with his presence. Tom. The name was a choked sob. He pushed off the frame and stumbled the last few feet into the entryway, shedding his heavy coat onto the floor with a dull thud. "I'm here, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice raspy from the smoke and exertion. "I'm safe." I didn't ask if he was hurt. I didn't ask about the fire. I simply threw my arms around him, holding him tight, uncaring that the soot was staining my pajamas. He smelled terrible, of burnt wood, wet gear, and exhaustion. But he was warm, solid, and breathing. He held me just as tightly, burying his face in my neck, his whole body shaking with residual adrenaline. "It was bad, Elle," he murmured into my hair. "A collapse. We got the guy out, but it was too close." We stood there for a long time, just clinging to each other, letting the silence absorb the terror of the night. Finally, I pulled back, gently wiping a streak of soot from his cheek. "You need a shower and sleep. You look like you wrestled a dragon." He managed a weary smile. "Just a very old, angry building." I led him to the bathroom. As the hot water began to run, dissolving the grime and the tension, I sat on the closed toilet lid, watching him. He was slow, methodical, utterly drained. When he emerged 20 minutes later, wrapped in one of my oversized bathrobes, the transformation was startling. The deep lines of fatigue were still there, but the man I loved was back. We crawled into bed, not for passion, but for survival. He needed grounding, and I needed reassurance. He fell asleep instantly, his arm thrown protectively over my waist, his breathing deep and even. I watched him sleep, the morning light illuminating the silver in his hair. I realized that my fear, while agonizing, was the purest form of love I had ever known. It wasn't just the thrill of the hero. It was the commitment to the man, flaws and all, danger and all. He woke up late that afternoon, refreshed and apologetic. "I'm sorry I stained your clean sheets," he mumbled, stretching. "I'll take soot-stained sheets over an empty house any day," I replied, handing him a mug of strong coffee. We sat together in the living room, the memory of the fire still heavy in the air, but the immediate crisis averted. "We need to talk, Eleanor," Tom said, setting his mug down. His whiskey eyes were clear now, focused on me, with that familiar intense seriousness. "I know," I agreed. "I can't do this indefinitely, Tom. The waiting, it's too much." He nodded, expecting the rejection. "I understand. I knew what I was asking when I brought this kind of life into yours. You deserve peace, Elle." "Don't be ridiculous," I countered, leaning forward. "I don't want peace. I want you. But I can't live like this, wondering if every siren is the one that takes you away, and then going back to my perfectly ordered house alone." I took a deep breath, the decision firming in my chest. "I've decided what my retirement will be. It won't be quiet. It's going to be about building a life with you. I want to be here, waiting, but I want this to be our home, not just mine. I want to know that when you walk out that door, you're coming back to us." Tom stared at me, his expression softening into profound awe. "You're serious? You want to give up the quiet life for this mess?" "This mess," I said, smiling through a sudden rush of tears, is the most alive I've ever felt. I'm tired of being a spectator in my own life, Tom. I want to be in the story, even if it's a terrifying one. He reached across the space between us, taking both my hands. His calloused thumbs brushed over my knuckles. Eleanor Vance, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I love you. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. And I will move mountains to make sure you never regret this. He paused, a familiar glint of determination entering his eyes. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. You need a place to belong, a reason to endure the waiting. I'm 50, and I don't have time for the half measures. He stood up, knelt awkwardly before me on one knee, a posture that must have been painful after the night he'd had, but he held it, and reached into the pocket of the borrowed bathrobe. He pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't new. The box looked slightly worn, probably a family heirloom. Eleanor, professor of history, my beautiful, brilliant, terrifyingly organized woman, you broke down my walls faster than I broke down your door. Marry me. Let's face the rest of the inevitable chaos together. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, exhilarating joy. Yes, Thomas Riley, 1,000 times. Yes. 25 days later, the wooden calendar hit 0. I didn't feel relief. I felt anticipation. The final bell rang on my teaching career, not with a mournful echo of the past, but with a vibrant promise of the future. We married quietly in the spring, 6 months after the fire. It was a small ceremony in my meticulously planned garden, now bursting with life. Tom wore his dress uniform, looking every inch the hero he was. Our life settled into a rhythm that was anything but predictable. We learned to cherish the quiet moments, the Sunday mornings reading side by side, the evenings spent planning our trip to the Rockies, the simple comfort of sharing the same bed. But the sirens were always there. Sometimes Tom would leave in the middle of dinner, kissing me quickly and promising to call. I would watch the news, track the scanner, and wait. My heart lodged firmly in my throat. I found purpose in those waits, volunteering at the fire station's auxiliary office, helping with paperwork, and organizing their chaotic supply closets, a historian's attempt to bring order to the front lines of chaos. He was still running toward the danger, and I was still waiting for him. But now, the waiting felt different. It was laced with purpose, commitment, and the knowledge that I was loved by a man whose life was defined by saving others. One cold December evening, Tom and I were sitting by the fire, reading. The house was quiet, smelling of wood smoke and coffee. He was resting, exhausted after a 48-hour shift. The station phone rang, not the urgent command, but a routine call for minor assistance across town. Tom sighed, running a hand over his face. Duty calls, he murmured, standing up. I watched him pull on his thermal shirt and heavy jeans. He paused by the door, turning back to look at me, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by books, the picture of domestic tranquility. You still sure about this, Professor? He asked, a familiar teasing challenge in his voice. You could be grading papers right now. I smiled, the love for this magnificent weary man swelling in my chest. I've analyzed the data, Captain. The risk-reward ratio is profoundly in my favor. Now go save some lives and come back home. He grinned, the genuine tired smile that had first shattered my composure. He strode across the room, bent down, and gave me a long, lingering kiss that promised a safe return. Always, he whispered. Then he was gone, stepping out into the cold night, leaving me to the silence. But it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a silence rich with memory, promise, and the terrifying, wonderful reality of our love. I was Eleanor Riley now, and my new life had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to Eleanor and Tom's unexpected journey. We hope you loved this long romance story. Where are you tuning in from today? And on a scale of 0 to 10, how much did you enjoy this story? Your comments and ratings help the channel grow tremendously.